Gareth Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And let me first of all congratulate my right honourable friend on this bill and all the work that he's put in. I can tell he cares passionately about it, and the diligence in which this bill is crafted is an illustration of that. Before I get to the content of today's bill, let me first put on record my admiration and thanks to all the taxi firms across Grantham and Stamford constituency who keep us moving across a very rural constituency, whether it's ABC Taxis in Stamford, Grantham Taxis, Smart Cabs in Bourne, Starline Taxis in Stamford, and the Excellent Cabs, who are excellent in Grantham. Let me thank you all, each and every single one of you. Now, we know the importance of this debate today because this is about fairness. It's about giving a level playing field for everybody that is born, that lives in this country, no matter where they come from, no matter what's happened to them in life, how they're born, where they're born. This is about treating everybody fairly and equally. We've heard from my honourable friends for Bassett Law and Bracknell some very interesting statistics that caught my attention. So let me repeat them for the House for additional emphasis. 14 million people live in this country with some kind of disability. 22% of our population in total, 1.2 million people in our country use a wheelchair. And disabled people are more likely, as my honourable friend for Bassett Law pointed out, more likely to need and use a taxi or a private hire vehicle than a non-disabled person. In fact, they're twice as likely to use a taxi or private hire vehicle.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Of course.
I wonder whether my honourable friend shares my concern at a couple of other statistics that arose from some research carried out by the disability charity Scope, which reported in 2019 that 2/3 of disabled people had experienced problems using public transport the previous year, and that 4/5 of disabled people felt anxious on public transport. So that really underlines the reasons, I would suggest, and I wonder if you would agree, that disabled people need to have access to taxis and private hire vehicles.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend who makes an excellent point. No matter the mode of transport, we should make it as accessible as possible. And we should note and put on record that, as I've mentioned in an intervention previously, this government actually is investing in making our public transport network more accessible, whether it is the £350 million to improve accessibility on our train network, or whether it's the National Bus Strategy, which has resulted in 99% of buses being more accessible and being acceptably accessible. But he makes a good point that we shouldn't ignore the fact that people still feel uncomfortable and there are still modes of transportation that are not accessible. And one of the reasons why, as he points out, disabled people do use taxis and private hire vehicles is because of the level of private car ownership, and I will come on to that in a moment. Madam Deputy Speaker, but we should also acknowledge as well that there are some improvements happening in this country as relates to transportation for disabled people. A recent Department for Transport survey showed that 75% of disabled people are actually satisfied with taxi services, but that needs to be 100%, and that is the point of today's bill. Taxi driver awareness training is also increasing, but as my right honourable friend pointed out, we can do more, we should do more, and we can never stop pushing for that. Of course, thank you.
Well, thank you for giving way. A week ago, I got a taxi from Stonehouse Station. I was coming back from Parliament and with Apollo cars, and my driver talked about this bill, and I was sort of saying, and he was very favourable of it. But he just spoke so favourably. He had like 5 or 6 regular clients that he takes. There's a group of Down syndrome lads that he takes ecology. He speaks so favourably. I think it is important that I've heard from my right honourable friend who is bringing this bill forward, and a number of colleagues, that we are supportive of the taxi drivers. And I think I interrupted the honourable member from going on to that point, but so many taxi drivers provide excellent service and really enjoy those trips as well.
Well, I'm very grateful for the intervention. I pay tribute to Apollo Taxis, just as I did at the beginning, for all those taxi firms in Grantham and Stamford constituency. She makes an excellent point. I should also point out that I really welcome the National Disability Strategy, which has already been referred to by one of my honourable friends. This is the first cross-government effort to improve the everyday lives of disabled people. And again, I praise this government for the efforts that it is making, and particularly the Disability Minister, who has taken to her brief with great passion and motivation. But there is clearly an issue, and this bill is seeking to address that issue. Many disabled people do face discrimination, and that is completely and utterly unacceptable when it comes to taxi services. Whether it's the outright refusal of service, the overcharging of passengers, the failure to provide assistance, all of this should not be happening. And to my honourable friend for Aylesbury's point, only 58% of taxis are wheelchair accessible and 2% of private hire vehicles. And it is important, as I mentioned, the National Bus Strategy. That strategy has enabled and resulted in buses, 99% of buses, being accessible for disabled people. And this is in stark contrast to the 58% of taxis and 2% of private hire vehicles I mentioned. And so there is clearly a gap that needs to be filled. As was mentioned by my honourable friend for Bassett Law, the government's 2018 Inclusive Transport Strategy aimed to support the creation of an inclusive transport network, and this highlighted the inconsistent application of the 2010 Equalities Act to taxis. So I'm delighted that this bill is seeking to address that inconsistency by stopping taxis refusing a journey, by requiring drivers to assist disabled people, and by requiring local licensing authorities to maintain and publish a list of wheelchair accessible taxis. And I think the point about transparency and having a register that was made by my honourable friend for Darlington and then backed up by my right honourable friend who brings the bill today is a very important one, and I hope that the Minister is listening. Thank you. Yes.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I'm grateful for him sharing those statistics. 58% of vehicles, taxis being accessible to disabled users, masks the fact that they are not evenly spread throughout the country. We can imagine that many of those are actually based here in London, and our constituencies, a distance from London, do not have requisite number of disabled accessible vehicles for our constituents, and I'm grateful for him highlighting the point with regards to the issue of a register that I raised earlier.
Well, again, I'm grateful for the intervention. I think it's worth highlighting that the second statistic that I made, 2% of private hire vehicles. Now, if you come from a rural area like in Lincolnshire, where I'm from, we don't have that many taxis. London has the bulk of the taxis, as he rightly points out, and so 2% of private hire vehicles that are accessible to disabled people is an astonishing and quite frankly, very disturbing figure, and just highlights why it is so important that my right honourable friend has brought this bill today. Now, it will be met, this bill and this initiative, and indeed this debate and the contributions that so many on this side of the House have made today. It will be met by many in my constituency with great appreciation. And I just want to put on record and pay tribute to the Grantham Disabled Children's Society, run by the incredible Darryl Blair and his team of volunteers who do so much for disabled children in Grantham. I've spent a lot of time with the organisation and Darryl in particular, and they do some fantastic work to make the lives of disabled children across Lincolnshire, but particularly in Grantham, a lot easier. And again, he will welcome, I am sure, the efforts of my right honourable friend in this bill today. But I do want to just indulge slightly, based on conversations that I've had with Darryl and the Grantham Disabled Children's Society, and just touch on two related points and issues that disabled people in Grantham and Stamford face, because it is a very important issue that is close to my heart. And that, first of all, let me just point out that while today is talking about taxis, some disabled people, about 4.2% according to the statistics that I've read, of our population, hold a blue badge pass. However, for many of these, they report growing issues with non-pass holders using disabled spaces at places like petrol stations and supermarkets and other venues incorrectly, or actually abusing them, which is an unbelievable thing. And I personally have seen this happen on countless occasions where non-blue pass holders have been using disabled spots. Now, of course, not all disabilities are visible, and I appreciate that, but the statistics show from the government that blue badge theft and blue badge misuse in particular is a real problem in this country. In 2021, 4,396 badges were stolen, and the most common reason for prosecution of misuse of blue badges was actually someone using somebody else's blue badge from one as a result of some action, albeit undetermined. Now, if even disabled people can get around, the second point I would like to make is that when they get to a place, there is insufficient places for changing and bathroom facilities. And I've spent a lot of time looking at changing places, and I've been shocked to learn that across Lincolnshire we actually have very few changing places facilities for disabled people in my constituency. And I support our local district council who wish and have put in bids to the government for a changing place facility in each one of the 3 towns that I represent, Grantham, Bourne and Stamford. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me just say that it is right that we debate this subject today. It's right that we put on record our thanks for our taxi firms across our constituencies, but also recognise that much more needs to be done to help and level the playing field for disabled people. This bill is an incredibly important bill that has my full support, and I'm pleased to say the support of many across this House. The government has an important role to play, as I say, in levelling the playing field, and I appreciate all the efforts they have done, but we should never be complacent. Thank you, Madam Leader.